Most people think disappearing from others is rude. They assume it's a sign of anger, immaturity, or emotional weakness. If someone suddenly becomes less available, replies less often, or quietly steps away from constant interaction, the first question people ask is, what's wrong with them? Very few stop to consider a different possibility. What if nothing is wrong? What if disappearing isn't about rejecting other people at all? What if it's about finally making room to hear yourself again? There comes a point in life when endless conversations begin to feel strangely empty. The same complaints are repeated. The same expectations follow you everywhere. Your phone never seems to stop demanding your attention. Yet, despite being connected to everyone, you somehow feel disconnected from yourself. Without realizing it, you've spent so much time responding to other people's needs that you've forgotten what your own mind sounds like when it's completely quiet. That's when something begins to change. You stop craving more attention. You stop chasing more conversations. Instead, you start craving distance, not because you hate people, but because you're exhausted from constantly being available to them. Most people are afraid of silence because silence reveals what distraction keeps hidden. It exposes the relationships that only survive because you're always present. It reveals the habits you've mistaken for genuine connection. More importantly, it forces you to meet the version of yourself that exists when nobody expects anything from you. In today's video, we're going to explore why stepping away from constant access can completely change the way you see yourself, your relationships, and the people you once believed knew you best. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that being constantly available makes relationships stronger. It sounds like the right thing to do. Answer every message, pick up every call, always check in, always make time. At first, it feels like kindness. Over time, however, something much quieter begins to happen. People stop appreciating your presence because they begin expecting it. The moment someone knows they can reach you whenever they want, your availability slowly becomes ordinary. Your time is no longer treated as something valuable. It becomes something that's simply assumed. Without realizing it, you've trained everyone around you to believe you'll always be there, no matter how tired, overwhelmed, or emotionally drained you may be. The dangerous part is that this doesn't only change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself. You begin measuring your worth by how useful you are to everyone else. You feel guilty when you don't reply quickly. You worry that saying no will disappoint people. Even taking a single day for yourself starts to feel selfish, as though protecting your own peace somehow makes you a bad person. That is how many people slowly lose themselves, not through one dramatic event, but through hundreds of small moments where they place everyone else's expectations ahead of their own well-being. Sometimes the healthiest decision isn't to explain yourself or apologize for needing space. Sometimes it's to step back long enough to remember that your value was never supposed to depend on how available you are to everyone around you. The first few days of creating distance often feel uncomfortable. You reach for your phone without thinking, only to remember there are no messages you need to answer. You wonder whether someone has noticed you've become quieter. A part of you even feels tempted to explain yourself before anyone has asked a single question. That feeling doesn't come from loneliness. It comes from habit. For so long, your days may have been shaped by other people's expectations. Every notification demanded a response. Every invitation seemed to require an answer. Every conversation pulled a little more of your attention away from yourself. Eventually, staying busy became normal, and silence began to feel unfamiliar. But something remarkable happens when you resist the urge to fill every quiet moment. Your thoughts become clearer. Questions you've been avoiding begin to surface. You start asking yourself whether certain friendships still bring you peace, or whether they've simply become routines you've never challenged. You notice how often you've agreed to things you didn't really want, simply because saying yes felt easier than disappointing someone else. This is the point where many people give up. They rush back into constant conversation because silence can feel unsettling at first. It doesn't distract you. It doesn't entertain you. It simply reflects what's already there. Yet, if you stay with it long enough, that same silence begins to feel different. It stops feeling empty and starts feeling honest. And in that honesty, you begin discovering parts of yourself that had been buried beneath everyone else's expectations for far too long. Something unexpected happens the longer you remain unavailable. The biggest change isn't in your life, it's in the people around you. Some become surprisingly impatient. Others suddenly start checking in after weeks or even months of silence. A few may even act offended, as though you've broken an unspoken agreement by no longer being as easy to reach as you once were. At first, this can be confusing. If these people genuinely cared about you, why would your need for space upset them? The answer often has less to do with your absence than with the routine they had grown comfortable with. They were used to knowing where you were, what you were doing, and that you would always respond when they wanted your attention. The moment that routine changes, uncertainty takes its place. And uncertainty makes many people uncomfortable. It forces them to wonder whether something has changed, whether they've lost influence in your life, or whether you're beginning to outgrow the role they expected you to keep playing. That's why your silence often says more than 100 explanations ever could. It quietly changes the balance of a relationship. The people who value you for who you are will respect your space without demanding constant access. Those who only valued your availability may begin pushing harder, questioning your distance, or making you feel guilty for protecting your time. Pay close attention during this stage. People rarely reveal their true expectations when you're always saying yes. They reveal them the moment you finally decide that your piece deserves the same attention you've spent years giving everyone else. As the days pass, another truth begins to reveal itself, and this one is much harder to ignore. You stop paying attention to what people say, and you begin paying attention to how they respond when they no longer have unlimited access to you. That difference changes everything. Some people won't even notice you've become quieter. They won't ask if you're okay or wonder how you're doing because your presence was never something they truly valued. It was simply something they had grown used to. Others will suddenly become more interested than they've been in months. They send unexpected messages, ask unusual questions, or find reasons to reconnect. It's easy to mistake this for affection. Sometimes it is. But sometimes people aren't reacting because they miss you. They're reacting because the pattern has changed. Human beings naturally become curious when something familiar suddenly disappears. The certainty they once had is gone, and now they want to understand why. This is why distance is such a powerful teacher. It removes the distractions that once made every relationship feel equally important. Without constant conversation, you begin seeing who genuinely brings peace into your life and who only brought noise. You realize that not every connection deserves the same amount of your energy. The most surprising discovery is that healthy relationships don't become weaker when you take a step back. They remain steady. They don't demand constant proof of your attention because they're built on trust rather than access. And once you experience that difference, it becomes almost impossible to settle for relationships that only survive because you're always available. The more time you spend away from constant interaction, the more your perspective begins to change. People haven't suddenly become different. They've always been this way. The only difference is that you're finally seeing them without the pressure of being emotionally involved in every conversation. You start noticing patterns that once escaped your attention. You notice the person who only reaches out when they need advice, but disappears when you need support. You notice the friend who celebrates your failures more enthusiastically than your successes. You notice the conversations that leave you feeling drained instead of understood. These things were always there, but when you're constantly caught up in the rhythm of everyday interaction, it's easy to overlook them. Distance slows everything down. It gives you enough space to observe instead of simply reacting. Instead of making excuses for people's behavior, you begin accepting it for what it is. You stop trying to explain away repeated disappointments. You stop convincing yourself that someone will change simply because you've been patient long enough. That doesn't make you cold, it makes you honest. One of the greatest forms of self-respect is believing what people consistently show you instead of clinging to who you hope they'll become. When actions and words no longer match, you stop arguing with reality. You simply accept it. And that's when your standards begin to change. Not because you become harder to please, but because you finally realize that protecting your peace is far more valuable than chasing relationships that require you to constantly ignore what your own instincts have been telling you all along. Once you begin seeing people more clearly, something even more important begins to happen. You start seeing yourself with the same honesty. For many people, this is the hardest part of the journey. It's easy to recognize the habits, expectations, and behaviors of others. It's much more difficult to admit that you've played a role in allowing those patterns to continue. You begin remembering the times you ignored your own instincts because you didn't want to disappoint someone, the moments you said yes when every part of you wanted to say no, the conversations you forced yourself to stay in simply because leaving felt uncomfortable. Little by little, you realize that many of your biggest frustrations weren't created overnight. They were built through small compromises that slowly became normal. That realization isn't meant to fill you with regret. It's meant to give you back your freedom, because once you understand how those patterns were created, you also realize they can be changed. You no longer feel trapped by the version of yourself that always put everyone else first. You understand that protecting your energy isn't selfish, And choosing peace doesn't mean you've stopped caring. In fact, it often means you've started caring about yourself for the first time in a long while. The people who truly belong in your life won't require you to abandon yourself just to keep them comfortable. Real relationships don't demand that you constantly sacrifice your peace to prove your loyalty. They allow you to be fully yourself without making you feel guilty for needing space, setting boundaries, or simply choosing a quieter life. By this point, something inside you begins to feel lighter. You no longer wake up wondering who has replied to your last message. You don't feel the same urgency to check your phone every few minutes. Conversations become something you choose instead of something you automatically respond to. For the first time in a long while, your attention belongs to you instead of being pulled in every direction by everyone else. That change is more powerful than it seems. Many people spend years believing they need constant interaction to feel connected. They surround themselves with endless conversations, social media, and nonstop communication because silence feels uncomfortable. But after spending enough time with your own thoughts, you begin to realize that being busy isn't the same as being fulfilled. There's a difference. A crowded life can still feel empty if every moment is spent seeking approval, reassurance, or validation from other people. Real peace doesn't come from hearing your phone vibrate every few minutes. It comes from knowing your happiness isn't controlled by whether someone remembers to call, text, invite, or include you. That's when your confidence begins to change. It becomes quieter. You stop chasing attention because you no longer need it to feel secure. You stop explaining every decision because you trust yourself enough to make it without asking for permission. Most importantly, you discover that your peace becomes much easier to protect when it no longer depends on other people's opinions. And once you experience that kind of freedom, it's difficult to go back to living a life where your emotional well-being is constantly placed in someone else's hands. Eventually, you reach a point where disappearing is no longer something you force yourself to do. It simply becomes part of who you are. Not because you've stopped loving people, not because you've become distant or emotionally closed, but because you've learned that not every message deserves an immediate reply. Not every invitation deserves a yes, and not every relationship deserves unlimited access to your life. That understanding changes the way you move through the world. You stop feeling responsible for fixing everyone else's problems. You no longer carry the weight of keeping every friendship alive by yourself. Instead of chasing people who constantly pull away, you begin investing your time in those who show up without making everything feel like a struggle. There's a quiet confidence that comes with this. You no longer need to prove your worth by being the most dependable person in every room. You don't feel the urge to defend every decision or explain every boundary you set. The people who respect you won't require endless explanations. They'll recognize that your need for peace isn't a rejection of them. It's a commitment to yourself. Ironically, this is often when your relationships become healthier. The people who truly value you stay because they appreciate your presence, not because they expect constant access to it. Those who disappear were often connected more to your availability than to who you really are. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. When you stop giving everyone unlimited access to your time, you finally discover who was there for you and who was only there because you were always there for them. If there's one thing disappearing teaches you, it's that distance doesn't change people. It reveals them. When you stop making yourself endlessly available, the truth has room to surface. Some relationships quietly fade because they were held together by convenience rather than care. Others grow even stronger because they were built on genuine respect instead of constant access. You no longer have to wonder where you stand with people. Their actions answer that question for you. But perhaps the greatest discovery isn't about them. It's about you. You realize that your life doesn't have to revolve around being everything to everyone. You don't have to earn your place by constantly proving your loyalty, sacrificing your peace, or carrying responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. The version of yourself that once feared disappointing people is slowly replaced by someone who understands that protecting your own well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary. That doesn't mean you'll spend the rest of your life alone. It simply means you'll choose your relationships more carefully. You'll value honesty over attention, peace over approval, and genuine connection over constant communication. The people who belong in your life won't expect unlimited access to you. They'll appreciate the time you freely choose to give. Sometimes the most important conversation you'll ever have isn't with another person. It's the one you have with yourself after the noise finally disappears. If today's video resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt the need to step away from everyone just to reconnect with yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found this meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more conversations that help you understand yourself and the people around you on a much deeper level.